Hi, my name is Bill Ritchie. That video you're watching is a 1974 black and white vintage video made by Norie Sato. Norie was a graduate student at the University of Washington School of Art in printmaking, and I was a professor. I realized after I made the tape that I made some mistakes. It was, after all, about 6 or 7 years after I started teaching beginning etching and the care and use of the scraper and burnisher, and frankly I was a little burned out, wasn't watching what I was saying. So I hope you'll overlook those mistakes, or perhaps through the magic of video I will cut in from time to time to make corrections. And I want to thank you ahead of time for your patience.
Hi, I'm your demonstrator, Bill Ritchie. We're bringing you a program today on the scraper and burnisher, brought to you by Arkansas Stone and Combination India Bench Stone. We're going to begin our demonstration with a talk on the use of the scraper. We have with us today the sponsoring students of the 350 class in the spring quarter of 1974. Scrapers come in all shapes and sizes. I have here a collection from my own studio, and this is my favorite scraper of all, and it's a standard scraper. It's a Muller brand, and it's quite good. This is a craft tool. I bought it because of its special curve, which allows me to get a slightly different kind of a scrape. This is a Graphic Chemical and Ink Company scraper, also a very popular brand. This is a combination scraper and burnisher, the scraper on one end, burnisher on the other. These two are jumbo scrapers. They're really bearing scrapers which you can buy from engineering suppliers, and their use is limited to very large work. This is a half-round scraper which also has certain limited use. Sharpening a scraper is very important right from the outset. When you buy the thing at the store, you'll find it has a very rough edge, and you can tell it's been ground by machine. So you must buy a stone at the same time that you buy a scraper. The first stone, the essential stone to have, is the double-sided India bench stone or combination bench stone. Now I have a round one here. They also come in smaller rounds and in long squares. It has two sides. One is coarse carborundum surface, and the other is a medium grain aluminum oxide surface. You begin the work with a new scraper or with a scraper that's been heavily used on the coarse side of the stone. Now, some of you might have used water on wet stones, but this is not a wet stone. It's carborundum stone. So here we use a light oil. Now, I use kerosene. It's my favorite material, and this kerosene floats the grit as you work, so it doesn't plug up the stone. A little kerosene. There's also a fluid which is sold by manufacturers of stones, especially for the use of grinding on their stones. It's a pretty obvious process as to what you have to do when you sharpen a scraper. However, a lot of people might overlook the fact that there's a curvature here, and you have to maintain something of that curvature on your burnisher, otherwise you will eventually, over the months of use, turn it into a triangular or a straight scraper. A scraper has a rounded edge on it. And so when you're scraping, although it might be hard to follow, there's a slight rocking motion as you scrape, like so. After a period of time, and this is you do by experience, by feeling it, seeing how sharp it is at the outset, you can then graduate to the medium side or the finer side of the stone and continue scraping or sharpening the scraper. There's still this rocking motion to maintain the curvature. You'll notice on the scrapers that I've shown you here, there's a wrapping right around the shaft. And that wrapping can be any kind of tape. I have a kind of lead foil tape wrapped around mine. This one has just plastic tape. I have used masking tape on some others. The reason for that is because when you're using the scraper, there's this necessity to hold it right there, and if you don't have it wrapped, you'll cut your finger. You'll make little cuts on your finger. Now there is a second stone, and that's the Arkansas stone. The first one isn't too expensive. I think they're still selling them for under $4 on the market. But the Arkansas stone is another story. This is about a 2-inch by 4-inch stone and costs in the neighborhood of $7. But it's the finest stone a person can own. You use it also with a little kerosene, and you still follow that slight rocking motion. Smaller stones can be had for under $4 in the Arkansas type, and they're adequate. They're not all this white color. Some of them go towards the pink and yellow in color. But if it's called an Arkansas stone, you don't have to worry that it's the right kind. And it's the finest grain. It's the finest grain, and it's capable of putting an almost razor-like edge on any sharpening, on any cutting tool. You notice I keep a little rag handy to clean the surface. Now, the variety of ways to test the sharpness of the stone. I usually just scrape the back of my thumbnail, and over time I've learned to recognize whether that's sharp enough. Another method is to slice a piece of paper, and if it does slice cleanly, evenly, then you can be sure that it's quite sharp. That's about all there is to sharpening the scraper. You must keep this stone handy, and in use you have to sharpen it every few minutes. You never let the scraper go until it just won't cut anymore. It will tend to slide and glide around on the plate when it gets too dull. So you keep your scraper sharp at all times. So your stone, and if you do this frequently, you only need to keep the Arkansas stone handy over to the side as you're doing your scraping work. Now in the main, a scraper is a kind of erasing tool. I have in front of me here a zinc plate, and it has some light aqua tinting and etching on it. And I'm going to demonstrate the right and wrong ways to use the scraper. First of all, if you lay the scraper down, you pick it up. It's a rather natural movement to just hold it so that it's flat in the fingers like so. But when you scrape, you have to keep in mind that the angle at which you hold the scraper has to be about 45 degrees or at an off angle to the direction of the scrape. So you see, this is the direction of the scrape. So, and the scraper is held at an angle, not straight like this, not 90 degrees to the direction of the scrape. You all understand that? That's critical. If you hold that at 90 degrees, it will begin to chatter. Now I'll show you what the proper way looks and sounds like, and then I'll show you the improper way and the result. Now this will be a little noisy, so you just have to hang on. Notice that I'm holding it at an angle to the direction of the scrape. And you keep in mind too to work slowly. You don't try to get all the work done at one time. You work slowly in this direction, lightly. You hold the scraper at such an angle so that the cutting edge is just cutting in, not at a vertical and not at too steep a slant, but you'll soon find just the right angle and the right kind of bite or cut to take. Now that's the proper use. It goes at an angle to the direction of the scrape. I'll show you what happens when you go 90 degrees. Very gradually, a chattering process will grow, and it creates a ripple effect. And you can always tell you're doing it wrong by the sound, because the sound will gradually get louder and more shrill. If you walk into a room, a studio like ours, and you hear that shrill scraping sound, you know that someone is scraping at 90 degrees. It's used as a special effect sometimes. I doubt if it shows up on the tape, but there is a very light ripple effect. It's something like the corrugations that you run into at a stop sign on a country road. It gets very bumpy right up to the stop sign. Now, the last thing to mention is that not only do you hold the scraper at a certain direction, but you scrape in many different directions. So now I'm scraping at about 45 degrees to the original scrape. And then you rotate it, and I'm also rotating the scraper itself, rolling it so that I can pick up on the second edge and then the third edge, and then when you've used all three edges and they're getting a little dull, you sharpen them again. Now this should result in a fairly smooth scraping job. Of course, any time you scrape on a metal plate, it's going to depress that area just slightly. And you may, if you do a lot of scraping, it goes very deep. You may have to scrape a broad area out so that the little depression doesn't interfere with the wiping. And for extreme deep areas, you even have to go round to the back and pound it out forward so that the surface, the original surface, is raised up to the same level. Or you apply pieces of tape or glue on pieces of paper, which when run through the press will have the effect of pushing the surface back up to the normal level again. And so that's about the process of scraping on a plate. If you don't sharpen frequently, or if you don't sharpen a new scraper at all, you will create more scratches than you remove. And that's why it's so critical to keep the stone handy at the side, and every now and then do your duty on the little stone. But if you keep this up, you should never have to go back to the combination India bench stone. Now, are there any questions? Did I leave anything out?
If the scraper catches and jumps and seems to dive into the plate, is that from having it at the wrong angle?
It was asked if the scraper skitters across the plate like that. It's probably attacking at the wrong angle or maybe too much pressure. And it's most probably because you're holding it at the wrong angle. You see, if you hold it at this angle, it's working like a road grater in a way. It's just having the effect of shearing the metal off. Whereas if you hold it straight at the angle, you have a chopping effect. It's chopping into the metal.
Yeah.
And it's almost impossible to hold it steady. There's one last use that I should mention, and that's a scraper used as a beveling tool. A file is frequently used, or a power grinder, but a scraper is very useful for beveling an edge of a plate. And this is done just by holding the plate at the edge of the bench and drawing off the edges. Sometimes people prefer this. It seems to be much faster and leaves a smoother bevel. But the same rule is true where you have to hold the scraper at an angle to the direction of the stroke. And so, never use too much force. It's always a good idea just to be gentle and easygoing at this process. If you use too much force, you're defeating your purpose. You wear your scraper down faster than you should. You'll do a poor job, and if you're scraping in a delicate area, you may slip. This tool can also be used somewhat as a drawing instrument besides an erasing instrument by creating light areas in an aquatint. Sometimes it's interesting to completely aquatint a plate and then do drawing in this manner right on the plate. You get special effects. They will print as lighter lines. Okay. The other tool, the burnisher. Now, before you use the burnisher, be sure that your work area is clean of all filings, all zinc filings and other grit and particles, because the burnisher requires to be very clean. If you have a piece of grit or filing get on your plate when you're burnishing it, you'll end up scratching it terribly and can even sometimes scratch the burnisher itself. A burnisher is a very highly polished chromium alloy steel, shaped and bent at such an angle so that you have a tiny, delicate point to work with, or broader areas out toward the edges. You must always keep this away from moisture and prevent it from ever getting rusted. I always use a little lubricant when I use a burnisher. The purpose of the burnisher is, like the scraper, to continue finishing and polishing the metal, removing areas. It can also be used as a drawing tool. You use it lightly, as I said, with the scraper. You don't force it. If you force it, it tends to leave grooves and ripples of its own, and you use it in many different directions. The purpose of the lubricant is to help it slide over the surface a little better. Now, there's a little known fact about the burnisher. I've never seen it stressed in the schools that I've attended, and that's the fact that you have to polish the burnisher. And for this purpose, I keep a little chromium polish or metal polish handy at the side, and then every now and then I reach over and I just polish the face of that burnisher. The reason for that is, especially on the more active metals such as zinc and aluminum, the surface oxidation is so rapid that it only has to sit in the air for a little while before it has a buildup of zinc oxide, or worse, aluminum oxide on a sheet of aluminum. That oxide collects and builds up on the face of the burnisher. It sticks there as if welded. And if you allow that to build up and remain, it will become very soon a scratching tool, and it will scratch all over where you think you're actually polishing. It will scratch little lines all over it. So you always keep this rag, one for the kerosene, one for the polishing compound, off to the side. And you'll notice when you polish, when you do that, you'll see black or green or gray residue come off the face of your burnisher. Now, like the scraper, the burnisher can be used as a drawing tool. It doesn't remove metal, it simply flattens it out, so it has a slightly different effect on an aqua-tinted or a soft ground-etched surface. And if you're interested in polished, smooth bevels, the burnisher can be used to finish off a bevel this way. For delicate work, the tip of the burnisher is useful. You can go in and polish the tops of little aqua-tinted particles, or if you're doing meticulous work, the burnisher can be useful in that way. Are there any questions about the use of the burnisher? Now, the scraper and the burnisher will leave you sometimes a finished plate, but often you'll need to add a couple of other items. For example, steel wool. Steel wool has the effect of eradicating all patterns and traces of the scraper and burnisher. They both leave a kind of path. You can kind of tell they've been used, and steel wool comes handy as a means of altering and eradicating that pathwork, that network of lines. This is about a number 1 steel wool. You can get double aught, and you can get very coarse steel wools and have a whole combination of material to use. Again, if you're using steel wool around the burnisher, you must be extremely careful, because the steel is even more likely to scratch the face of the burnisher. The last item I think I'll mention is the use of this liquid polish. Also comes in paste forms. This is an ordinary chrome polish which you buy at automotive supply stores. Another brand is called rubbing compound. There's one called polishing compound. They're all very good for this purpose. And the use of this polish will bring the zinc and copper metals up to a high shine, and this, when printed in tallow, of course, will yield you your highlights. I prefer handwork, although you can use a buffing wheel and white diamond polishing compound to do large areas where you're not trying to be too careful. This polish does not terribly drastically affect previously worked areas such as aquatints and so on, so it's safe to use it even if you smear over into the surrounding parts. After you've used it, I then take a clean part of a cloth and buff it up to a final high shine. And then I clean it with a strong solvent such as our Toluol solvent here. or xylene. And this removes the black residue that comes up from polishing. And then once more with a clean cloth. It's ready for press at this point.
And you use powdered polish as well as liquid?
It was asked if you could use powdered polishes. There's one called Brasso I've seen on the market which has been used. Anything that claims to be a metal polish is probably good. There's also a material called snake slip which lithographers use on stones, and this is good because it comes in a stick form and you can polish areas and grind them down. Honing sticks, other kinds of things are sold by metal finishing outfits. All these materials are available at jewelers suppliers, especially in Seattle. We have Mayer Brothers, but frankly most of our polishes come from the automotive supply places. These big scrapers and burnishers I bought at a surplus store for about $2 or $3, and they have been handy. This is a draw knife. This is for cutting metal plates when you don't have shears. You use a straight edge. I don't have a straight edge here, but the draw knife is like a burnisher in reverse. And you repeat this drawing action over and over again for about 10 or 15 minutes, and gradually you find yourself going through the metal. And it's sharpened on the India bench stone as well. These other tools sitting around here are birons. I have a lining tool which draws a multiple of parallel lines, a scorper for taking out areas about 1/16 of an inch wide, flat areas. And this little device is a tool for the lazy man's tool for sharpening burnishers. Sharpening a burnisher is a very tedious process, and so they've invented this tool for lazy people to use, which holds the burnisher at just the right angle so that when you're sharpening it, all the angle and everything is taken care of.
That's fine.
All these tools are available through the printmaking supply houses in Chicago and New Jersey. If there aren't any more questions, then I guess that